What does it take to erase a city? What does it take to silence 500,000 voices in a single night? We often talk about nature as a giver of life, but on November 12, 1970, the world learned that nature is also the ultimate destroyer. It wasn't a war, it wasn't a nuclear bomb, it was wind and water. In the span of just 6 hours, the deadliest tropical storm in recorded history slammed into the coast of the Bay of Bengal. It didn't just flood the land, it scrubbed the earth clean. By the time the sun rose, islands were gone, villages were gone, and 500,000 people had vanished into the ocean. This is the true story of the Bhola Cyclone, a moment when the sky fell, the sea rose, and humanity was reminded of its terrifying fragility. To understand this catastrophe, we first have to understand the trap. The Bay of Bengal is one of the most beautiful places on Earth, but meteorologically, it is a loaded gun pointed at the land. Picture a triangle. The bay is wide at the bottom near the Indian Ocean and narrow at the top. At the very tip of this triangle lies the largest river delta in the world, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta. This is where the mighty rivers of the Himalayas empty into the sea. Over thousands of years, these rivers have dumped billions of tons of silt, creating a jigsaw puzzle of low-lying islands. These islands, known as chars, are incredibly fertile. If you drop a seed here, it grows. This fertility attracted millions of people, farmers, fishermen, families living simple lives in homes made of bamboo and tin. But there is a fatal flaw in this paradise. These islands are flat. They sit mere feet above sea level. There are no mountains to block the wind, there are no hills to climb for safety. And because of the funnel shape of the bay, when a storm pushes water north, the water has nowhere to go but up. It gets squeezed, compressed, and forced over the land. In 1970, millions of people were living inside this funnel, completely unaware that the perfect storm was forming just over the horizon. The engine of this disaster began thousands of miles away in the Pacific Ocean. It started as a remnant of a tropical storm named Nora. It drifted quietly across Southeast Asia, a ghost of a storm, until it reached the warm, deep waters of the Indian Ocean. November 8, 1970. The conditions are perfect. The sea surface temperature is over 27 degrees Celsius, or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat energy rises from the ocean, feeding the clouds. The system begins to spin. At first, it is just a depression, a cluster of thunderstorms rotating counterclockwise. But as it moves north, it feeds the energy of the bay. It begins to tighten. An eye forms, a calm, terrifying center surrounded by a wall of violent wind. By November 11th, it has become a severe cyclonic storm. Today, we have supercomputers that can predict a storm's path within inches. In 1970, the technology was primitive. Satellites were grainy, communication was slow. The meteorological stations knew a storm was out there, but they couldn't calculate the exact surge. They couldn't predict the violence. And critically, the people on the islands had almost no way of knowing. There were no smartphones, no internet, only a few transistor radios running on dying batteries. As the monster approached, most of the delta was asleep, believing it was just another rainy season. Disasters are often a game of bad luck, but what happened next defies probability. It was a cosmic alignment of destruction. The cyclone was scheduled to make landfall on the night of November 12th. If you look at the astronomical charts for that night, you will see a chilling detail. It was a full moon. The moon exerts a gravitational pull on our oceans, creating tides. During a full moon, this pull is at its absolute peak, creating what is known as a spring tide. The high tide that night was already going to be significantly higher than normal. The cyclone didn't just hit the coast, it hit the coast at the exact moment of this massive high tide. This created a phenomenon known as wave run-up. The low atmospheric pressure of the storm sucked the ocean surface upward. The hurricane-force winds pushed the water forward, and the moon pulled the tides higher. These three forces combined to create a hydrological bomb. It wasn't just a flood, it was a vertical wall of the ocean, 20 feet high, moving at the speed of a car. 10 p.m., November 12th, the wind begins to scream. On the islands of Bhola, Monpura, and Hatia, the villagers wake up. The rain isn't falling down, it is flying sideways, stinging like bullets. The bamboo walls of their huts begin to shake. The tin roofs are ripped off, flying into the darkness like guillotines. The radio station in Dhaka had issued Danger Signal Number 4, but this was a bureaucratic failure. The signals were confusing. To a farmer on a remote island, Signal 4 didn't mean run. It didn't convey the apocalypse that was coming. So they stayed. They huddled together in the dark, waiting for the storm to pass. Midnight. The wind speed hits 185 kilometers per hour, or 115 miles per hour. The noise is deafening. Survivors described it not like wind, but like a solid object hitting them. The sound was a continuous, high-pitched shriek. And then a new sound emerged from the darkness, a low, guttural rumble from the south, louder than the wind, louder than the thunder. It was the sea. It didn't flood gradually, it crashed. A 20-foot surge of salt water smashed into the coast. It obliterated the mud embankments built to protect the farms. In seconds, dry land became the bottom of the ocean. Imagine the terror. You're in your home, in the pitch black. Suddenly, freezing cold water explodes through your walls. The water is churning with debris, trees, boats, roofs. Within seconds, the water is over your head. There is no up or down. There is only the violent current. Fathers grabbed their children. Mothers tied their babies to their chests with cloth, but the force of the water was too great. The surge acted like a giant grinder. It ripped families apart. It swept away the strong and the weak alike. On the island of Monpura, 25,000 people lived. By morning, only a few thousand would be left standing. The survivors were the ones who found palm trees. There are harrowing accounts of men climbing to the tops of coconut trees, tying themselves to the fronds and hanging there for hours as the water raged below them. They could hear the screams of their neighbors being swept away into the dark, unable to do anything to help. For 6 agonizing hours, the ocean occupied the land. It churned, it destroyed, and then, as the tide turned, it retreated, sucking the debris and the bodies out into the deep Bay of Bengal. November 13, sunrise. The wind stopped. The sun came out. The sky was a brilliant, mocking blue. But the world below had changed. Where there once were villages, markets, and mosques, there was now only mud. A thick gray layer of silt covered everything. The silence was the first thing the survivors noticed. No birds sang, no cattle mooed, no children cried. Then the horror set in. As the water receded, it revealed the dead. The scale of the loss was beyond human comprehension. Bodies were not just found on the ground, they were found high in the trees, left there by the receding floodwaters. The rivers were clogged with corpses. It wasn't just humans. Millions of livestock, cows, goats, buffalo, lay dead, bloated in the tropical heat. These animals were the wealth of the people, and they were all gone. Survivors wandered the mud in a daze, looking for family members they would never find. On some islands, 45% of the population was dead. In some villages, every single person under the age of 10 and over the age of 60 was gone. An entire generation of children and elders wiped out in one night. How do you count the dead when whole villages disappear? Initial reports said 10,000 died, then 50,000, then 200,000. As relief helicopters finally flew over the remote islands days later, the pilots looked down and saw what they looked like carpets of bodies. The official death toll is widely accepted to be 300,000 to 500,000. To put that into perspective, that is more than the population of Miami or Manchester, gone in one night. That is 3 times the death toll of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. That is more than the devastating 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. It stands to this day as the single deadliest tropical cyclone ever recorded in human history. But the storm didn't just kill with water. In the days that followed, it killed with disease. The water supply was contaminated with salt water and decaying bodies. Cholera and typhoid broke out. Survivors who had fought the ocean were now fighting microscopic killers. They had no food, no fresh water, no shelter from the sun. Why was Bhola so deadly? It wasn't just the wind speed. We have seen stronger winds since then. It was the bathymetry. The ocean floor leading up to the delta is very shallow. When a storm pushes water over deep ocean, the energy has nowhere to go but up. It gets squeezed, compressed, and forced over the land. In 1970, millions of people were living inside this funnel, completely unaware that the perfect storm was forming just over the horizon. The Bhola Cyclone of 1970 is more than just a historical event. It is a scar on the face of
the ocean floor leading up to the delta is very shallow. When a storm pushes water over deep ocean, the water can circulate down. But over a shallow shelf, the energy has nowhere to go but up. This amplified the surge. The Bhola Cyclone changed meteorology forever. It forced the world to realize that water, not wind, is the true killer in a hurricane. It launched a global effort to improve satellite tracking and early warning systems. Today, Bangladesh has learned from this pain. They have built thousands of concrete cyclone shelters raised on stilts. They have a volunteer army of 50,000 people who ride bicycles into remote villages with megaphones to warn of incoming storms. In recent years, storms of similar power to Bhola have hit the same region. But instead of 500,000 deaths, the tolls are often in the double digits. It is a miracle born from a tragedy. It proves that while we cannot stop the wind, we can protect the people. The Bhola Cyclone of 1970 is more than just a historical event. It is a scar on the face of the planet. It is a reminder of the sheer, indifferent power of the natural world. We build our cities, we draw our borders, and we think we are in control. But on that night in November, the ocean reminded us that we are just guests on this planet. 500,000 souls were lost in the darkness of that night. They were farmers, fishermen, mothers, and children. They had dreams and futures that were extinguished in an instant. By telling their story, by remembering the scale of this tragedy, we honor their memory. Nature is beautiful, but it is also terrifying. And in the face of such power, our only defense is knowledge, preparation, and unity. If you enjoyed this journey through deep time and want to explore more hidden histories of our world, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It helps us bring more of history's greatest stories to life.